Welcome back to Book to Read, episode 48.
48 already, huh?
Yeah, time flies when you're deep diving into amazing books.
It really does.
And speaking of amazing books, this week we're tackling a classic, one that might bring back some childhood memories.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
A Wrinkle in Time. And I think there's way more to this book than meets the eye. You know, you read it as a kid and it's this cool adventure story.
Yeah, definitely more.
But there's some serious depth lurking beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
Ready to uncover those hidden layers.
I am. Let's wrinkle some time.
Okay, so before we jump into Meg Murray and all those tesseracts,
Yeah.
we got to talk about Madeleine L'Engle, the mastermind behind this whole thing. This wasn't just some whimsical space romp she dreamed up.
Right.
This woman was dealing with some heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Like Einstein's theories, the Cold War.
It was a different time for sure.
All those anxieties about conformity, about feeling like an outsider, they seep into every page of this book.
And that's what makes it so relatable, right? I mean, those anxieties are still relevant today.
Definitely timeless. Yeah. Okay, so speaking of outsiders, let's talk about Meg Murray, our unlikely heroine.
Okay.
She's brilliant, like seriously smart. But she's also awkward, insecure, doesn't quite fit in at school.
The classic underdog story.
Totally.
Yeah.
And to top it off, her dad has vanished.
Yeah.
Like poof, gone.
A lot for a young girl to deal with.
Right. It's like L'Engle is setting her up to fail, almost. But here's the genius part.
Oh, yeah.
Those flaws, those become her strengths. You know, like her anger, her impatience. It's those things that help her resist the pressure to conform. It's like L'Engle is saying, hey, it's okay to be a little messy, a little different.
It's almost like those are her superpowers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Meg's not alone on this journey. We have Charles Wallace, her little brother.
Ah, Charles Wallace.
He's gifted, but in a way that makes him super vulnerable too.
He's like an open book almost, you know, so receptive and sensitive.
Totally. And it makes him a target for IT, this embodiment of evil in the story.
Right. IT preys on those who are different, who stand out.
Yeah, that scene where he gets taken over by IT,
Yeah.
it's chilling. Like watching innocence get twisted and warped.
Yeah, and it makes Meg's mission even more urgent, more personal.
For sure. But thankfully, she's not facing this alone. Enter the Mrs. W's.
The Mrs. W's are cosmic guides.
More like cosmic guides with a serious touch of the bizarre.
Oh, yeah. They're not your average fairy godmothers.
Definitely not. On the surface, they seem like these eccentric old ladies, but there's so much more to them.
Right underneath that facade lies immense cosmic power.
I mean, Mrs. What's-Its transformation on Uriel. Talk about a showstopper. Like, whoa, these ladies mean business.
Appearances can be deceiving, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And then we have Calvin O'Keefe.
Oh yeah, Calvin,
Right.
a popular jock who unexpectedly teams up with the Murrays.
An unlikely addition to the team.
Totally. But he brings this whole other dynamic to the story. Like, he's popular, athletic, but he still feels this deep longing to belong.
He sees something genuine in Meg and Charles Wallace, something he's missing in his own life.
And together, they end up on Camazotz.
Camazotz.
Yeah.
Shudder.
This is not a planet you want to book a vacation to, trust me. Everything's perfectly ordered, everyone acts the same. It's conformity on steroids.
L'Engle paints such a chilling picture of a world where individuality is completely crushed.
Like a dystopian nightmare, right? And at the heart of it all is central intelligence, this massive building that represents the insidious power of IT.
Right. It's not about brute force. It's about control through subtle manipulation.
Yeah, and that's the scariest part. It's like that old saying, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish,
Yeah.
and he'll vote for whoever promises to keep the fishing industry alive.
Oh, that is good. You just made that up.
Yeah, I just came up with that. But anyway, IT's game is about making people dependent on its control, promising happiness and security in exchange for obedience.
A very seductive and dangerous proposition.
Okay, and before we spiral into a full-blown existential crisis,
Yeah.
let's talk about the Tesseract.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just some cool sci-fi gadget for time travel.
Right. There's more to it.
It's a metaphor, too. A way of breaking free from those constraints, those societal wrinkles that try to define who we are supposed to be.
But L'Engle is also warning us, right? Like, breaking free can be dangerous, especially if you're not prepared. Like Mr. Murray.
Yeah. He rushes in head first, without fully understanding the risk.
And that has serious consequences, not just for himself, but for Meg and Charles Wallace, too.
Because they walk right into a world where even the air you breathe feels controlled.
Controlled by the pulsing rhythm of Camazotz.
Creepy. So wait,
Yeah.
what exactly ISET? Like, we keep saying IT, but I need more details. Paint me a picture of this cosmic baddie.
IT is essentially disembodied intelligence, thriving on conformity, seeking to eliminate all individuality. And the chilling part, it doesn't use brute force, it seduces. Promises happiness and security in exchange for obedience.
Okay, officially terrified. Is there any hope in this story? Like any light at the end of this dystopian tunnel?
There is, and it comes from the most unexpected place. Remember all those flaws of Meg's? You're gonna tell me that's where the hope lies, aren't you?
Exactly. Meg's love for her brother, her refusal to conform, even her anger and impatience, those become her weapons against IT.
Because those are the things IT can't control, or they're too human, too unpredictable.
It's like L'Engle saying, embrace your messy self because that's your shield against the forces that try to box you in.
Love that. Okay, so they're on Camazotz.
Right.
Meg, Charles Wallace, Calvin, Mr. Murray.
Uh-huh.
And L'Engle throws a curveball our way. Meg and her father escape IT's clutches, but not without consequences. They end up, well, it's not exactly clear where, but it's definitely not home.
The Tesseract can be a fickle beast.
Oh, yeah. And when Meg wakes up,
Uh-oh.
she's completely frozen. Like, paralyzed, can't move, can't speak.
That's not good. It's like the black thing has seeped into her, even after escaping IT's physical presence.
Yeah, and the reunion with her father. Well, it's not exactly the fairy tale ending she'd imagined.
Right. Finding her dad doesn't magically fix everything.
The world is still messy. There are still problems. And even Mr. Murray, with all his scientific brilliance, doesn't have all the answers.
It's a harsh reality check.
Yeah.
That moment when you realize even your parents can't shield you from everything.
And that disillusionment makes Meg even more susceptible to the black thing. It feeds off negativity, despair.
Ugh, I hate when that happens. So what happens next? Do the Mrs. W's swoop in for the rescue?
They do eventually, but before they arrive, things take a turn for the worse.
Oh no.
Meg, fueled by fear and anger, lashes out at her father, blames him for everything that's gone wrong.
Yikes. Family therapy session on aisle 5.
Right, but it shows how insidious the black thing is. It wants to sever those bonds, those connections that give us strength.
Ugh, talk about hitting below the belt. So it's all doom and gloom from here on out.
Actually, no. This is where L'Engle introduces some of the most bizarre and strangely endearing creatures in the book.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Imagine giant furry beasts with tentacles. Lots of tentacles.
Tentacles, that doesn't sound very comforting.
I know, right? But despite their rather alarming appearance, these creatures are incredibly kind and gentle.
Okay, I'm cautiously optimistic.
They rescue Meg, Calvin, and Mr. Murray and transport them to a planet called Ixchel.
Ixchel. Okay, vibe check on this planet. Good, bad, tentacly.
Ixchel is like the anti-Camazotz. Imagine a world where communication isn't about words, but about empathy, about feeling what others feel.
Wow, so no awkward small talk on this planet.
None whatsoever. The inhabitants, those tentacle beings, are wise, compassionate. They care for our heroes, allowing them to heal and recover.
Okay, tentacles officially redeemed. So it's a sanctuary, a place to recharge.
Right.
But I'm guessing they're not going to be lounging on Ixchel forever.
Nope, they're not. Meg knows she needs to rescue Charles Wallace.
Of course. So what, they just hop back on a Tesseract and head back to Camazotz?
It's not that simple. First, they need to explain the situation to the beasts.
All right, make sure everyone's on the same page. But how do you explain the Mrs. W's to beings who communicate through pure feeling? I mean, how do you put these cosmic forces, these otherworldly beings, into words?
It's a huge challenge, for sure. But Calvin has a breakthrough. He describes the Mrs. W's as angels, messengers of God.
Do you think that clicks for the beasts? I mean, they seem pretty spiritually evolved, but it's hard to say if they have a concept of religion.
It seems to resonate, but it's still not quite enough. Thankfully, at that very moment, who should appear?
Don't tell me. The Mrs. W's.
The Mrs. W's themselves.
Hallelujah. The A-team of cosmic intervention is back in action.
But, as always with L'Engle, things aren't as straightforward as they seem. They know rescuing Charles Wallace won't be easy.
Of course not. He's deep in IT's web, and storming the Central Intelligence Building isn't exactly an option.
Exactly. And they also can't just poof him back to safety.
So what's the plan?
The only way to save Charles Wallace is for Meg to face IT directly.
Alone. Talk about a David and Goliath situation. What's she gonna do? Throw a dictionary at IT?
Well, it's not about brute force, that's for sure.
Okay, but what is she supposed to do?
Mrs. Whatsit makes a crucial point here. She says they can't know the outcome of Meg's journey. If they did, it would be like living on Camazotz, with everything predetermined, no freedom of choice.
So no spoilers. No cosmic cheat sheet for Meg. That's rough.
It is, but there's a deeper message there. Mrs. Whatsit compares their lives to a sonnet.
A sonnet, the poetry form.
Exactly, a strict form with rigid rules, but within that structure, the poet has complete freedom to create.
Okay, I'm seeing the metaphor here. Meg has the structure, the mission, but the outcome, the poem she writes with her actions, is entirely up to her.
You got it. And just before Meg leaves for Camazotz, Mrs. Who imparts a powerful message.
Uh-oh. Hit me with some wisdom, Mrs. Who.
God often chooses the foolish and the weak to confound the wise and the mighty.
Goosebumps. So it's not about conventional strength.
Right. It's about those very things Meg sees as weaknesses. Her emotions, her impulsiveness, her faults, those become her strength.
It's like those things that make us uniquely human. Those are the things that can overcome even the most powerful evil.
And that's the message L'Engle drives home in a poignant scene between Meg and her father. Meg apologizes for blaming him, for wanting him to fix everything.
Oof. I've been there.
It's a moment of raw honesty, acknowledging that even the most loving parents can't shield us from all the pain in the world.
That transition from childhood to adulthood is tough. Realizing that we have to fight our own battles.
It is. And Mr. Murray reassures her, tells him he wants to protect her, but he also knows she has to face this challenge herself.
Beautiful. A true testament to the power of parental love.
And then they send her back to Camazotz, into the belly of the beast.
I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it.
But before she goes, Mrs. Witch gives Meg her final gift. Not a physical object this time.
Ooh, I love a good cryptic message.
It's something Meg has to understand in a flash.
Okay, lay it on me.
The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
Whoa, that's deep. It's like everything we've been talking about, those ideas of strength and weakness is being turned upside down.
Exactly. And with that, Meg is thrust back into the darkness of Camazotz, ready to confront IT.
Okay, I need a moment to process all of that.
Yeah.
But before we get to the final showdown, let's take a quick detour and talk about something awesome for our listeners.
Okay.
So, you know how we love connecting over great books?
It's what we do here.
Well, there's this amazing app called Bookspace. It's like a virtual book club.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
You can geek out over your favorite quotes, connect with other readers, even organize your own library.
Sounds right up our alley.
Seriously, if you're a bookworm, you need this app. Find it on all major app stores. Just search Bookspace. You won't regret it. Now let's get back to Meg's epic battle against IT.
So Meg's back on Camazotz, alone, facing IT, and that numbness she felt after escaping the column with her father. It's back, and it's even worse this time.
It's like the black thing left its fingerprints on her soul. You know, even when you escape its clutches, the chill lingers.
Exactly. And she's also grappling with the realization that finding her father wasn't the cure-all she'd hoped for.
Yeah, the world's still messy.
Even Mr. Murray, with all his scientific brilliance, doesn't have all the answers.
That's a tough pill to swallow, right? That moment when you realize even your parents can't shield you from everything.
That disillusionment, that despair, it makes her even more vulnerable to the black thing, because darkness feeds on those feelings.
It's like a cosmic parasite latching onto your negativity.
Right. And just when you think things can't get any worse, Meg lashes out at her father.
Oh no.
Blames him for everything that's gone wrong.
It's like family therapy session on aisle 5. But I get it. Sometimes when you're hurting, you strike out at the people closest to you.
It's a natural human response, but in this case, it plays right into the black thing's hands because it wants to sever those bonds, those connections that give us strength.
It's like that saying, divide and conquer.
Right. Exactly. And just when you think things can't get any stranger, L'Engle throws in.
What now? More tesseracts? Another creepy kid chanting?
Nope. Giant furry beasts with tentacles.
Okay, hold up. Tentacles. That's not exactly what I picture when I think of comforting.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But these creatures, despite their rather alarming appearance, are incredibly gentle and kind.
Okay, I'm listening.
They rescue Meg, Calvin, and Mr. Murray.
From the black thing.
Well, more like from themselves, really. And they take them to this planet called Ixchel.
Ixchel. Okay. Vibe check on this planet. Good. Bad. still tentacly.
Ixchel is like the anti-Camazotz. Imagine a world where communication isn't about words, but about empathy, about feeling what others feel.
Wow. So no awkward small talk on this planet.
None whatsoever. The inhabitants, those tentacled beings, they're wise, they're compassionate, and they care for our heroes, allowing them to heal, to recover.
Okay, I'm starting to warm up to these tentacles. So like a sanctuary, a place to recharge before facing IT again.
Exactly. But they can't stay there forever. Meg's priority is rescuing Charles Wallace.
Of course. So they just hop on another Tesseract and head back to Camazotz.
It's not that simple. First, they have to explain the situation to the beasts.
Right, make sure everyone's on the same page. But how do you explain the Mrs. Arobius to beings who communicate through pure feeling? How do you put these cosmic forces into words that make sense to them?
It's a huge challenge. But then Calzin has this breakthrough. He describes the Mrs. Arobius as angels, messengers of God.
Do you think that resonates with the beasts? I mean, they seem pretty spiritually evolved, but it's hard to say if they have a concept of religion.
It seems to spark a glimmer of understanding, but it's not quite enough. And thankfully, at that very moment, who should appear? But
Don't tell me. The Mrs. W's.
the Mrs. W's themselves.
Yes, the cavalry has arrived. Time to storm Camazotz and snatch Charles Wallace from IT's clutches.
Hold your horses. Rescuing Charles Wallace isn't going to be that easy. Of course not. He's like knee-deep in IT's brainwashing, and they can't just waltz into central intelligence and demand they release him.
Right, and they can't just poof him back to safety either. Its hold on him is too strong.
So what's the plan? Is there a plan B? Or C? Or even Z?
The only way to save Charles Wallace is for Meg to face IT directly.
Alone. That's terrifying. She's up against this force of pure evil. What's she gonna do? Throw a dictionary at IT?
It's not about brute force. Mrs. Whatsit makes that very clear. She tells Meg they can't know the outcome of her journey.
No spoilers. No cosmic cheat sheet. That's harsh.
But there's a deeper wisdom there, too. She compares their lives to a sonnet.
A sonnet, like the poetry form.
Exactly, a strict structure, rigid rules. But within that structure, the poet has complete freedom to create.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Meg has the structure, the mission, but the outcome, the poem she writes with her actions, that's entirely up to her. You got it. And before Meg leaves for Camazotz, Mrs. Who gives her this powerful message. She says, God often chooses the foolish and the weak to confound the wise and the mighty.
Goosebumps. So it's not about conventional strength, is it?
Nope. It's about those things Meg sees as weaknesses. Her emotions, her impulsiveness, her faults, those become her strengths.
It's like Lengel is saying, those things that make us uniquely human, those are the things that can defeat even the most powerful evil.
And that theme is reinforced in this really poignant scene between Meg and her father. Meg apologizes for blaming him for wanting him to fix everything.
Oof, I've been there. Wanting your parents to have all the answers, to make everything okay.
It's that transition from childhood to adulthood, realizing that we have to fight our own battles.
And Mr. Murray, he reassures her, tells her that he wants to protect her, but he also knows that she has to face this challenge herself.
It's a beautiful example of parental love and acceptance.
Okay, so then they send her back to Camazotz, back into the lion's den.
They do. But before she goes, Mrs. Witch gives Meg one final gift. Not a physical object, though.
Ooh, I love a good cryptic message. What is it this time?
It's something Meg has to understand in a flash, and Mrs. Witch tells her, the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
Wow, that's deep. It's like everything we've been talking about. Strength, weakness, power. It's all being flipped on its head.
Exactly. And with that, Meg is thrust back into the darkness of Camazotz, ready to confront IT.
Okay, I need a minute to process all that. But before we get to the final showdown, let's take a quick detour and talk about something awesome for our listeners.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So you know how we love connecting over great books?
It's what we do here.
Well, there's this amazing app called Bookspace. It's like a virtual book club. You can geek out over your favorite quotes, connect with other readers, even organize your own library.
Sounds right up our alley.
Seriously, if you're a bookworm, you need this app. Find it on all major app stores. Just search Bookspace. You won't regret it. Now, let's get back to Meg's epic battle against IT. Okay, so Meg's back in the belly of the beast, ready to face IT. And I gotta say, I'm not feeling super optimistic about her chances.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak moment, that numbness she felt after escaping the column. It's back, and it's worse. It's like the black thing is holding her hostage from the inside.
So not only is she up against this cosmic entity of pure evil, but she's also starting the battle emotionally compromised. Talk about fighting with one hand tied behind your back.
It's a recipe for disaster,
Yeah.
right? But here's where things get really interesting. Meg has this moment of clarity. She realizes that her flaws, those things that make her different, those are her weapons.
You're going to tell me that her anger, her impatience, her tendency to burst into tears at the drop of a hat,
Exactly. Those are the things that IT can't comprehend or control.
because they're too human, too unpredictable, right?
Right. It's like she's glitching the system with her own weirdness.
I love it. So what does that look like? I mean, does she start yelling random things at IT?
Pretty much. She starts reciting things that are totally out of place on Camazotz, like nursery rhymes, the Gettysburg Address, even mathematical equations.
Wait, math. How is that going to stop a cosmic evil entity?
It's not about the content itself, but the disruption. She's breaking free from IT's mental control, asserting her individuality against this world of enforced uniformity.
So it's like she's throwing IT off balance with her own chaotic human energy.
Exactly. Each nonsensical utterance chips away at IT's power.
I love it. So does it work? Does IT just crumble under the weight of Meg's weirdness?
It does. Meg starts to feel her own mind and will returning, pushing back against the darkness. But Charles Wallace...
Oh yeah, Charles Wallace. He's still MIA in the land of mind control, right?
He is, and he's become a mouthpiece for IT, taunting Meg, trying to convince her that resistance is futile.
Oh, that's gotta hurt. Hearing those words from your own little brother, knowing it's not really him speaking.
It's a cruel tactic. But Meg refuses to give up. She remembers Mrs. Whatsit's words about love being IT's one true weakness.
Love. That's her secret weapon. I mean, can you really defeat a cosmic entity of pure evil with a hug and our Hallmark card?
Maybe not a Hallmark card, but Meg, in this incredible act of instinct and love, cries out, "Mrs. Whatsit loves me."
Whoa. And IT's reaction?
It's like you can hear the record scratch in that creepy dome. IT, in its arrogance, had completely underestimated the power of Meg's love, the depth of her bond with Mrs. Whatsit, and the sheer force of her individuality.
So what happens next? Does love conquer all? Give me the good news.
It does. It's like a dam breaking. All that darkness, the coldness, the control, it just shatters. Meg's swept away in another Tesser.
Another whirlwind Tesseract ride. Fasten your seatbelts, folks.
And when it's over, she finds herself back on Earth, with Charles Wallace safe and sound in her arms.
Victory. Take that, IT. They faced down the ultimate cosmic baddie and lived to tell the tale. So happily ever after, right? Back to normal life.
Well, not quite. A Wrinkle in Time doesn't shy away from the lasting effects of trauma.
So there's no magical reset button after battling cosmic evil?
Nope. They've been through a harrowing experience. They carry the scars, the memories. But they also carry the knowledge that love, individuality, and courage are powerful weapons against darkness.
They've been changed, but also strengthened.
And that's the beauty of it, right? It's not about erasing the darkness, but about finding the light within ourselves to overcome it.
Man, what a journey. No wonder this book is considered a classic.
It's more than just a fantasy adventure, right? It's about the battle between good and evil, both in the world and within us.
And it's a call to action. A reminder that we all have a role to play in resisting conformity, in choosing love over fear, in embracing our weird, messy, beautiful selves.
Exactly. And that message, that's something worth holding on to long after we close the book.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? Why should they care about A Wrinkle in Time even all these years later?
Because it reminds us that we all have a tesseract inside us. A unique set of gifts and quirks that make us who we are. And those things, those are our strengths, not our weaknesses.
It's like Lengel is saying, the world might try to put you in a box, but you have the power to break free.
And that's a message that never gets old.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of another deep dive. We explored time travel, battled cosmic evil, and discovered the power of love, all within the pages of A Wrinkle in Time.
And remember, the battle isn't over. We all have our own black things to confront, our own Camazotz to resist.
But you have the power within you to fight back. Embrace your weirdness, choose love, and never underestimate the power of a good book. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and keep those conversations going.